Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be taking a look at a Wall Street Journal opinion piece. Now this was written by Marilyn Greenwald, published on March 12th. And before we get into this, all you gotta say is the left with the whole Dr. Seuss thing, because it's just not rolling over. They're really trying to beat this worse than Sargon of Akkad has ever beaten something in his life. Well, actually, I can't say that because he's beaten some stuff pretty bad. We're talking dead horse to the point of bleached bones and playing those, those ribs like they're a xylophone. Beat a dead horse. All right. That's how bad he's done it. They're not quite there yet, so I can't say that, this is that type of situation. But this is kind of like that whole thing of like him still milking to this day that I wouldn't rape you thing with Jess Phillips. It's that level of cringe on what they're trying to do with Dr. Seuss, because they're now bringing out the Hardy Boys, and they're saying it was a good thing that it was propagandized and had changes made to the work. Okay, with the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, that it was a good thing that it happened in the 1950s. And they're talking about, like, basically butchering the work to take as part of it, and saying that's a good thing with them taking away racial stereotypes. So I saw this and I'm like, well, they're beating this, and this needs kind of some attention brought to it, because this just goes to show the desperation of the left. This just goes to show how they will justify anything. You know, it used to be the left supposedly were the ones for free speech and would have decried, this with the fact of being brought to attention now, and would have said, well, we're the original Hardy Boys. People should still be able to see that. Now they're like, look, it's a good thing. Anyway, so let's see what Marilyn Greenwald had to say here. The title, Dr. Seuss, Meet the Sanitized Sleuths Known as the Hardy Boys. And then the lead-in. The detective novels got a rewrite in 1959. What was it needed scrubbing up? Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to laugh at this, because this is funny, this next sentence. To me, at least. Was it a needed scrubbing or a sign of cancel culture? It was a sign of censorship. It was a sign of propagandizing work, because they knew kids read it. Because back then, kids did a lot of reading. Because, you only had like 3 television channels if you were lucky. And they didn't broadcast all day and night into the wee hours of the morning. So, when you have 3 channels, if you're lucky, you're going to do a lot more reading. Comic books were big back then because of that. Regular books were big back then. Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew were big sellers back then. Anyway, let's get into her opinion piece here. The recent decision by the estate of Theodore Dr. Seuss Geisel to pull 6 of his books because of crude stereotypical portrayals has exploded in the news. Some claim that the action represents the worst of cancel culture, while others praise the decision because they believe the depictions can promote racial insensitivity. Well, the thing is kids are not even going to see that, and that wasn't what they were claiming. They were claiming it actually is going to turn kids into literal racists, but whatever. That was what their claim was. But Geisel's heirs aren't the first to confront the sanctity of children's literature and whether books should ever be altered for changing times. In 1959 and 1960, some of the world's most beloved fictional characters, Nancy Drew, Frank and Joe Hardy, Tom Swift, and others, received a facelift as publishers grappled with a similar challenge. In 1959, series fiction published by the Stratton-Meyer Syndicate underwent a multi-year rewrite, ostensibly eliminating racial and ethnic stereotypes and to conform to modern times, which is kind of bullshit here. This is like how she's taking what they did, and she's saying that it was too modern, conforming to modern times and all this other stuff. She's basing this as it's an opinion piece. She's giving her opinion here. It's not a fact. Remember that. Those extensive changes weren't publicized and remained unknown for years to unsuspecting readers, including parents who assumed their children were reading the same books they read decades ago as kids. Bullshit, because these were books that parents also read to their kids. I'm sure more than a few parents reading them to their kids realized that something was different. They might not have been able to put their finger on it, but I'm sure they realized it. But hey, whatever. You try to play like people are stupid and that they wouldn't notice this. It was before the internet, so it wasn't like you had all these people going, yeah, I was reading my kid Nancy Drew, I was reading it to them, and I saw this was different from when I read it, or I was reading the Hardy Boys and I saw this was different. This was before the internet, so you're making assumptions based on the fact that you think people are stupid and are going to buy into your assumptions. The updating, which you notice is in quotes, as the publishers called it, was a secret worthy of talents of the Hardys or Miss Drew. Yes, because you want to know why? People would have been outraged. They would have said, why are you changing these books? Why are you censoring them? And they're trying to make it sound like this is a good thing, that they secretly changed the books. This is what we're dealing with. This is the type of people that don't want free speech, that don't want art to stand on its own, and for people to understand context from the time that it was created. They want to be able to manipulate it and change it to their needs, to push their agendas, to push their ideology. And this is justification for it. And that's what happened when this went on. But let's leave that out. Even the author of the first group of Hardy Boy books, the man behind the pen name Frank W. Dixon, wasn't aware of the changes. Hardy Boy's ghostwriter Leslie McFarlane was told about the changes by a Toronto reporter more than 3 decades after he wrote most of the books. Yeah, well, of course. Probably was just a pay for, writing the books type thing. I don't think he necessarily cared. He was getting paid to do a job. This wasn't like this was a character he created and invested himself in. It was a paycheck. Which they try to use the fact that, it was a paycheck, try to use that as not being a factor and be like, well, he didn't care. They're trying to ignore it, I should say. But yeah. McFarlane had moved on to become a successful writer and film producer, but he was shocked by many of the changes. Well, see, they do that, and then they go, McFarlane didn't mind that the revisions eliminated the description of a Chinese character as having an evil yellow face, nor did he care that, which I love how they take this out of context. What was the actual full statement? See, that's the thing. They take this one little thing out of context, and they don't give you the full context of what the sentence was, or say, lead up or context on the note of like the story to that point or anything. And they just instantly racist. Now, mind you, it doesn't look good because they're taken out of context, but I'm just saying. But anyway, nor did he care that criminals were no longer being described as dark or swarthy. Well, first off, swarthy could be a white person. Hell, it could be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person to some extent, because swarthy, all right, well, it generally gets accepted with dark, but with, say, darker skin, like Italians are swarthy. All right. But you could have a swarthy Swede. I mean, they would be hairy and they would be built like the same idea. But swarthy generally does, get accepted with the fact of, say, Italians. So what are you saying? That's racist because Italians are swarthy? Because Eastern Europeans can be swarthy or Western Europeans? But yeah, well, Slavs can be swarthy, like that type of European. I have to think about that for a second. But swarthy is a lot of different groups. It's not like you're picking out one single group and you're being racist. I don't understand the problem with that one. And this idea of dark, if they're dark-skinned and you're using that as a descriptor, or you're saying that they're a dark person, not describing their skin color or something, that's a different story. You got to have context here. And this idea of often with foreign accents. Well, this is the thing. A lot of those people they were going up against were foreigners. Their adventures took them around. They were traveling. Nancy Drew, I think, went on the Orient fucking Express, if memory serves. Are you telling me she's not going to encounter someone who's swarthy with a foreign accent on the Orient Express? I mean, this is the type of shit that they're pushing here. Like, they seriously want to die on the Dr. Seuss hill. Because if they can censor a children's book, they can go and start censoring more and more things. But anyway, he and his fellow ghostwriters were equal opportunity xenophobes. Cops were usually Irish, Italians ran fruit stands, and Scots swept floors. Okay, well, first off, all right, this is where the New England to Boston accent's going to come in here. Because I'm going to start talking like a fucking New Englander here. All right, I'm going to not say my ass. I'm just going to be like, fuck this shit. Because you know what? Go to Boston, you dumb fucks. Okay, back in the day when those books were written, guess what the streets were lined with? Boston cops who were friggin' Irish. Okay, Boston cops were Irish, overwhelmingly. New York City cops, Irish, overwhelmingly. Okay, Chicago, you had a overwhelmingly Irish population there that were cops as well. Are you going to tell me when you have a general stereotype that's accurate, especially for that time, you can't say that you can't portray the cop as Irish? Oh, heaven friggin' forbid. Wow, I can go right into my Boston accent and not say my ass, huh? All right, and this idea of Italians ran fruit stands. Well, if you go back to those times, you know who did a lot of produce sales back then? You fucking jamoke. Italians. They had markets. They did fruit stands. Okay, on the corner, most of the markets in New York City and in Boston. I mean, they were Italian-owned, you fucking jamoke. Jesus Christ. And the idea of Scots swept floors, well, yes, a lot of Scots were involved in those type of trades. I mean, shit, where the hell do you think Greenskeeper Willie came from? Aye, you fucking moron. Holy shit. Because those stereotypes held true back then. Because you had a large number of a group working as cops. The Irish. So, yeah, people generally associated cops being Irish because they were fucking Irish, you fucking moron. Italians ran fruit stands, ran produce businesses. They ran meat markets. Jesus Christ, because they did that. You ignore this historical friggin' fact that those stereotypes had weight to them because this is what was going on back then. Oh, you fucking idiots. Well, Meredith or whatever her name is. Is it Meredith? Marilyn. Jesus Christ, Marilyn. Getting back out of the friggin' Boston accent, New England accent. I'm going to start saying my R's again. All right. This is ridiculous. All right, so anyway, another revision deleted the comment of a black character who speaks in an odd dialect while resting his feet on a train seat. I pays my fare and I puts my shoes where I please. Excuse me, but have you ever been down south, you stupid fuck? I lived in the South. I've heard white people talk like that from the South. I've heard black people talk from the South like that. I lived in Louisiana, you dumb shits. I have family in Florida. I've spent a lot of time down there over the years. I've heard both black and whites have a Southern accent like that. And you want to portray it like it's fucking racist? Are you kidding me? I pays my fare. I puts my shoes where I please. People talk like that from Louisiana that are, all right, minus the, you know, the talking with the French accent type of idea, like, you know, the Cajun, okay? A lot of people in Louisiana talked like that were black and white. It's racist of you, Maryland, to assume that that's automatically an accent meant to be racist towards blacks when white people talk like that down south. I mean, this is why I wanted to cover this, because all these assumptions and everything else and trying to say this is a good thing. Look at the Hardy Boys. Look what happened with the Hardy Boys. Because, you know, they went after, they did stereotypes of cops. And then it gets even better than this. Then they talk about the propaganda, or Maryland talks about the propaganda from this point on that's put into it. And you're going to be like, what the fuck? And she's saying this is a good thing. I mean, we're going to get this little part first, but yeah. Anyway, but as part of the revisions, the books were shortened considerably, and many literary allusions and picturesque descriptions were removed. So they made the books worse. They took out the best part of these types of books, okay? The description, the immersion, the things that get you to become part of the story. They cut it out because of, like, I don't know if it was the idea that they were thinking they were creating the Reader's Digest version of it. But they cut that out, and, oh, that isn't a bad thing. No, they took out the very thing that made the stories enthralling, the very thing that drew you into them. Okay, because when you take and you decide to shorten them by taking out the literary allusions and picturesque descriptions, you're not doing a service, you're doing a disservice. It's a work of art, okay? The person who got paid to write it and didn't give a shit might not care, but those who enjoyed the books might, who enjoyed them in their original context, in their original print. This is disgusting. Also new, authority figures, especially policemen, were portrayed as people to be respected and admired at all times. Yes, and you wonder why now, okay, they're saying that was a good thing. And these are the same people that are going, oh, it's a bad thing, cops can't be trusted, all that today. You got to love the hypocrisy here. You literally have them saying cops can't be trusted. We need to end the police. We need to cut their funding. We need to do all these things. And then they're going, look at how good this was. They taught you to suck cop dick and bow down to authority. I mean, that's disgusting. And anyway, look at this. This is how they say this is a good thing. This is particularly evident in the case of the Hardy Boys characters, a colleague and Smuff. Bumbling detectives who in the original were routinely outwitted by Frank and Joe when it came to solving cases. Because heaven forbid the Hardy Boys can't be smarter than a couple of cops. Because, you got to bow down to authority. I think that kind of changes the context. When the Hardy Boys are supposed to be these great, teenage detectives. I mean, I grew up watching the Hardy Boys, and Nancy Drew Mysteries, where they were driving around in like a 70s, don't come in, if the van is a rockin', don't come a knocking friggin' panel van. But I mean, I read some of the books too. And the Hardy Boys are supposed to be these great detectives. The idea is they're like the idea of, say, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is better than the police detectives. That's the idea of it. But you basically have cucked them going, well, we got to have this thing of bowing down to authority. They can't make a cop look bad by solving a crime. You can't have them, bucking authority and going against the cops telling them not to solve it. You can't have them making them look like idiots. And they're saying this is a good thing because we need to bow down to authority now. This is the whole thing. That's propaganda. That's what this is about. When they changed those books, it was about propaganda. And she's saying this is a good thing. In the revisions, the cops were respectable, helpful, and competent. A change that rattled McFarlane, who was particularly proud of the silly Keystone Cops-like figures he created. He believed that most of his readers enjoyed irreverence and humor. Well, that's another thing. You sacrificed the humor because that was part of those characters. And here you are going, well, that's a good thing. You are destroying a work of art. Now, I'm not saying that we're talking Mona Lisa, Louvre type of things here. We're talking Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. We're talking kids' books. But they should be allowed to be there in the original context. They should be there in the original publishing. This was done at a time when you had this idea of brainwashing the youth of America to be more American because we're going into, you're talking the end of the Korean War, later part, end of, beginning of, us transitioning to the Vietnam War. You basically wanted to have, if you were the government, if you were the establishment, you wanted to have these subservient, America-loving, willing to just bow down to authority types because you were looking at the fact that we're going to be fighting communism. We need to have people that are going to bow down and do what they're told and listen on the note of being in the military. That was the idea of this because with the Hardy Boys, they did that because of that fact, because they want them to go, well, I'm going to listen to an authority figure. When that authority figure tells me to go out into that rice paddy and get shot, I'm going to go out in that rice paddy and get shot. As opposed to, my combat boot needs to be tied. Hold on a second, guys. I mean, seriously, that was the whole point of that. But let's just ignore that because, any idiot can look at that and say, well, that's probably what was going on there. McFarlane was of the conviction that children read serious fiction to be challenged. He often said in the interviews that he wanted to send boys and girls to dictionaries. Gone in the rewrites were the words like sibilant, ostensible, and expostulate. Wow, that tongue-tied me. Expostulate. an inveterate reader, McFarlane also threw in a few references to Shakespeare and Dickens in his Hardy Boys books, allusions that were ditched in rewrites. Yes, so here's the thing. This was also about the fact you don't want these kids to be reading, say, like Shakespeare and Dickens and learn certain things morally that go against what you're trying to push. So that's probably why they removed it, because you don't want them to be able to go beyond that point, all right? And this thing of, like, these words, it was to dumb the kids down in part, all right? If you, the more well-read you are on the note of, like, say, books or magazines, whatever the case may be, just say reading material that has a wide and varied use of English language in it, you expand your grasp and use of the English language, which is exactly what he's doing here. And if you look now, we went from, say, wanting kids to go and get a dictionary and learn a word to, as I got older, like as towards my teenage years, like going into my teenage years, you started to see the whole hooked on phonics bullshit where kids can't spell worth a shit today. You then saw Common Core make kids even stupider and their vocabulary smaller. With each thing, we've seen a smaller and smaller vocabulary. They're trying to dumb you down, people. This is what this is. Why do you think they cut these words out that will make you go to a dictionary? It wasn't for easy reading. It wasn't for the fact of selling more books. Because they don't want kids to understand that there are more things out there, or maybe go learn something. It was mindless propagandizing, brainwashing going on. That was the idea of that. With like the idea of the authority figure. That was the whole point. Like many critics of children's literature, McFarlane believed that most of the changes robbed the books of their personality, turning them into shadows of their former selves. They were gutted, he said in a 1973 interview. Yeah, of course they were. The changes made by the Stratemeyer Syndicate exemplify the challenges inherent in modifying classic works of literature, especially for children. Well, first off, if it's a classic work of fucking literature, you're not changing a damn thing. The whole idea is a classic work of literature stands on its own. Okay, you take the good with the bad with it. So here you are trying to say, well, classic literature. So now this is what they're wanting to do. They're going to go after the classics now. All right. So Hardy Boy and Nancy Drew, she's equating that to the classics. Because you can't have the classics that challenge authority. You can't have the classics that came out as a result of the Enlightenment that led from, the end of the Dark Ages. You can't have the enlightenment that happened from there and the growth that happened from there that led to these people learning different things, like the idea of the concepts of freedom, okay? You don't think after the Dark Ages ended and you had because the printing press, they tried to outlaw the printing press, the church and the nobles were, if you were found one, you were killed type of idea. It was a punishable by death type of thing. So you have an enlightenment happen. It led from that point. Now, they're trying to walk things back. That's what this whole point is this is about walking things back and dumbing you down. This is the exact type of shit that George Orwell was trying to warn people about in 1984. The dumbing down of society to walk things back from their enlightenment so that they can be more pliable, more easily controlled. This is an example of that, because at the time that this was done with the Hardy Boys books and the Nancy Drew books, it was about propagandizing the youth of America to be these America-loving, authority-loving types that they could go and use towards the future, like with the idea of the Cold War and fighting in Vietnam. I mean, I don't think they necessarily looked at the fact of what would happen on the note of things escalating to the point that it didn't last as long as it did, but you started to have, at that point, more involvement in Vietnam. You had the ending of the Korean War, not that long prior. So we need to go and get our next generation that we can make pliable and fight our wars for us. That's what this was. And one of those things you want to do is you want to make it so that these kids don't think for themselves or go, hey, maybe I want to go and see what this reference to Shakespeare is, because that's not someone who's going to go and necessarily do what they're told, because they're more willing to go and look for something. You're making them inquisitive. They're not just going to take something at face value. But hey, whatever. You know, that's supposedly a good thing, I'm sure. Anyway, are the changes being made for the benefit of young minds, or are they being dumbed down to draw more readers? No, it's about being dumbed down to control them, but whatever. Or are they made for the economic benefit of the publishers who want to be safe and avoid controversy that might put a dent in sales? No, it's not about that, because you know what? Good example. If that was the case, then Salman Rushdie's book that questioned Islam wouldn't have been a best fucking seller and no one would have touched it. But a publisher did touch it, and they made millions. Give me a break. In the case of the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and other Stratton-Meyer characters, it might have been all these reasons. First, written in the early 20th century, the content of the books did reflect the casual prejudices of the era, but literary cancel culture also exists in children's literature in particular. Well, here's the thing. I'm sorry, but no. It was written in the early 20th century, but yet not that far along down the road, a couple decades later, we need to change things. And you're trying to say, well, that was because of racial stereotypes and all that. No. Again, it was about the fact of the time that they were in, and they were realizing, shit, we need people to suck up to authority and all this. Why do you think they're saying they were portraying cops like they were, as opposed to the comedy Keystone type stuff that was in the original versions? Common sense. Harsh stereotypical portrayals in books may reinforce racism and sexism in young readers. Bullshit! Holy shit. No. Most kids won't associate that and become racist like you're trying to claim. Or sexism. Not going to happen. If a kid has a parent who's raised them to not be racist, you dumb shit, then they're going to look at it and go, well, that's kind of racist, and it's not going to make them racist. Or they're naive, and it's not going to make them racist. Or they're looking at something and go, that's kind of sexist, because they were raised to not be sexist either. Or look at something and go, and not associate, have that make them turn them into it. This is ridiculous. But anyway, so may reinforce in young readers, and altering text to avoid that may be necessary. No! You sleazy shit. Marilyn, you sleazy shitbag. There's no reinforcement of those things. There's no reinforcement of racism or sexism with that. It's a fictional character. They can go and look at it and go, that if they've got enough common sense, and look at it and go, that fictional character's fucking racist. Maybe you think they might look at that and go, well, that's not right. No, you automatically assume that these kids are going to be brainwashed by this. You're sleazy. But changing the tenor and personality of the work of the artist is another issue, as is encouraging bland, colorless work because it may be easier or safer to market. It is one thing to eliminate offensive or crude content that might instill offensive views in children, but all changes should be made with a light hand and after much thought. No changes at all. Okay, a work of fiction, a work of nonfiction, all of it should stand on its merits. Okay, any written work should stand on its merits. Okay, you take the good with the bad. When it comes to the classics, you're going to say Oedipus because he wanted to fuck his mother needs to be censored? Huh? You probably would. This is ridiculous shit. It is one thing to eliminate offensive or crude content that might instill offensive views in children, but all changes should be made with a light hand and after much thought. I'm sorry, I had to reread that with that tone. I mean, that's just like how this person thinks. I mean, that tonality right there fits perfectly. McFarlane wrote his last Hardy Boys book in 1947, but his understanding of his audience holds. Readers are a logical and perceptive group who know when they are being condescended to. Yes, and that's the thing. Thank you. That's the whole thing with this situation. And this asshole, Marilyn, doesn't even realize it. See, you've got all these people on the left saying, this isn't cancel culture, this isn't that. You've got even normies waking up to the shit that's going on. Why? It's not just the right. And why is that? It's because they're being condescended to. They're being looked down the noses of, by the nose. They're being looked down the noses. They're being looked down at down people's noses at them. Okay, these elites, these leftists. They're looking down their noses at them and being condescending to them about this situation. So the normies are even going, what the fuck? And this kind of has to go. This kind of goes back to the fact of like, what's going on in Hollywood right now? Like, say, with Gina Carano and shit. I mean, you look at, like, Overlord DVD, Lord Doomcock, the future ruler of the world. You look at Neurotic, okay? You look at the channel Midnight's Edge. They came about and have... Excuse me. They came about and have the basis that they do on the note of subscribers because of the normies. Because they're reporting on this cultural Marxist shit and all these people, things from their childhood, Star Wars, for example, all right? Hell, Ghostbusters was another one with the 2016 remake bullshit, okay? These channels came about because of this attack on culture, this editorializing and changing of culture, this editing of it, this remaking of culture to fit the leftist agenda. You have all these normies waking up to stuff like that. They're waking up and they're seeing Dr. Seuss and they're like, I read Dr. Seuss. My parents read me Dr. Seuss. And they're going, this is complete bullshit. And then you go and you talk down to them. You're looking down your noses at them, being all condescending, and you expect them to be stupid enough to accept your bullshit. And this guy has enough common sense to realize people are smart enough to realize when they're being condescended to. And, that's what's going on here. But Marilyn doesn't realize, well, she's being condescending to people, that we're not stupid. Anyway, I've covered this well enough. I'm leaving things here. If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video, when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.